This is Platform Disco, discovering the strategy, business models, technology, and operating models in our platform ecosystem economy. In today's episode, you will hear about a net zero objective by 2040. You will hear that it's actually easier to do it in B2B than B2C because we consumers are sometimes a little weird. Why ESG skills are really important, and it's not just about training a staff and employees in AI these days. Why marketplaces will play a critical role, and how batteries are really important in all of that. And ultimately, you will hear how our guest wants to make herself redundant. So enjoy this episode, and now back to the dance floor. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Platform Disco, the journey into circular platform business models, technology, and operating models in an ecosystem economy. Today, we have a very exciting guest. We're really thrilled to have Melanie Kubin-Hardewig with us. She's Vice President, Group Corporate Responsibility at Deutsche Telekom. That's easy for us to say because we're native speakers, Deutsche Telekom. And we would first like to find out more about her history and what made her join Deutsche Telekom. But before we go there, I hand over to my co-DJ.
Hey, I'm David Detjen, and I'm also super happy and proud to talk to you and super interested regarding CSRD, ESG, and all what comes up in the circularity area.
So welcome, Melanie. Glad to have you here.
Yeah, thank you to both of you for inviting me. I'm also happy to be able to join. And shall we start with your first question?
There you go. What made you join Deutsche Telekom?
So I'm with Deutsche Telekom, not surprisingly, I think, for a typical German corporation employee. I'm with Deutsche Telekom already for about 20 years. That's an amazing time span, I think. And I joined very quickly after finishing my studies and some trainees afterwards. I'm a trained lawyer, by the way. I'm not a dedicated ESG expert, so I have a total different background. And I started in that profession as a lawyer about 20 years ago when I was working with corporates. I was also looking into becoming a judge or doing something else, but I felt that corporations have a significant influence. And if I want to turn around a lot of things, that's a good place to be. And quickly after I started, I found out that I want to do more than just law. It's a super great profession, don't get me wrong on that one, but I felt there's more to a process, to an ecosystem, to operations that I should know. So I moved into finance roles. I did an MBA in between, got 2 kids, got married, and moved a little bit around Deutsche Telekom. So I spent some time in different countries, different roles, working on IT products, IT procurement, and finally did procurement strategy for the whole group. And that was the point in time when I got in contact with the ESG work, because one of my parts was also to look at sustainable supply chain topics. And I looked at it from a very financial and operational driven point of view and found out that if I now want to do something else, and I'm a person who every few years tends to move and wants to do something else, something on top, develop, and I felt why not go into that area without having a big clue about it. So when I started, I was really a newbie on ESG, I have to say. But I got in contact with the lead of the team at that point in time. We got along very well with each other and felt that, yes, with my financial background, with a legal background, with a lot of knowledge of the group and how group issues and challenges are worked out, I'm a good partner to join that team. And that's what I did about 6-7 years ago. Initially working a lot on the green topics, performance management, close still to the financial role that I had before. And then 2 years ago, my predecessor went into a well-deserved retirement, and I had the chance to take over the whole corporate responsibility team. And this is where I am now, and I'm now overseeing a lot of different topics, from the environmental strategies to the social engagement initiatives and what we want to drive there, into a lot of operational questions, how we bring it into the company, into our own ecosystem, into our supply chain. So it's a big role with a lot of variety.
Oh, I love that introduction. Historically, ESG roles were very much communication, and your profile really shows that you went into the weeds, right? So you can really create impact on the business level, so that it's not greenwashing, but really touching business model, products, services, financials, and also in the governance context, your legal background is astonishing. And over and above that, and we can already tell now, and also in the pre-discussions, we feel a lot of passion when we listen to you. You have a lot of energy and drive for that. And you don't feel those 20 years that they have dragged on you. What makes you actually so passionate about this role that you have?
I think there's one sort of red line if you look through what I've done so far into my CV, and also the type of projects that I was driving. And by the way, this is also what made me stay with Deutsche Telekom. It's not that I haven't had really interesting offers and I'm always looking around, but there are reasons why I then move into something else here at DT. And that thing is going into topics which need a person with dedication, which need a solution, which need development. So I'm a person who likes looking into the future. I'm not afraid of uncertainties and ambiguities. I think this is exactly the fun part of the work. And these are the type of projects that I always look for, and they somehow end up with the person who's probably good in doing those projects and supporting those projects. And ESG personally for me was a topic before already. So I'm in my private life, I'm a person who's oriented towards people, towards human beings, who's taking care of others and who is working in social welfare projects. I was always interested in the green topics on the private side. But when I then found out there is a rule, or let's say it this way, there's a room that corporations should really fill out, because they have such a big influence. I felt this is a perfect spot for me, because it's challenging, because it's super complex. You have to learn a lot the whole time. Learning never stops because it's so quickly developing and evolving. And it's about creating the future and taking people with you. I think that's the combination of these two things. And this is what makes me passionate. So when I start Monday mornings, I can tell you that in theory, I have a plan for the week and I have meetings and things to be done. But during that week, so many other things happen. And that's the interesting part, that you're never ever bored. And there are things that have a purpose as well. And this is intrinsically motivating a lot.
Nice. I really like when you say you start the week with a plan and then life and the topic throws stuff at you. And that's what we probably share. We work in marketplaces, platforms, and ecosystems, and it's super complex from a business model, technology, and also operating model aspect. And again, as you just said, you have to take people along. Platform business models aren't easy to wrap your head around. And particularly when you work in a consortium or a bigger ecosystem, you have multiple cultures, multiple personalities, multiple P&Ls. You got to all take them along. And therefore, it's never boring. David, over to you.
So for me, it's pretty interesting that you have that long-term goal of reaching climate neutrality until 2040. So can you elaborate a bit on this transition plan? So how you want to reach these goals and with which partners, and how you influence the whole ecosystem around you?
Yeah, I can share a little bit of insights, also how we got to that goal, because it's for Deutsche Telekom, it's not the first climate goal. So as a corporation, we had climate targets, by the way, since the late 80s. Yeah. Wow. So close to 30 years. That's again a long time span. And it started with little reduction targets, looking at the very narrow scope 1 and 2, so the emissions that we produce our own. And then we started to develop over the years and found out a few years ago that it's great to have reduction targets, but we should really contribute significantly by coming close to zero emissions. And then, by the way, offsetting the rest, which cannot be really reduced at that point in time. And the goal that we're now having really looks at all the emissions we're producing. So everything we do ourselves, which is called Scope 1 and 2, and then also all these Scope 3 emissions, so everything that happens in the value chain for Deutsche Telekom before our own production and after our own production at the customer side. So that's a big amount. And we felt that, yes, we can make a change. And this is exactly what you're referring to. It creates impact for the customers. And we have to work together very closely, because there are certain decisions we can take alone. When it's about how do we electrify our fleet, which is one of the key targets, by the way. How do we do renovating of buildings, going into heat pumps instead, for example, of using fossil fuels for heating. These are decisions we can take. It's an investment case that we always have to calculate, but it's in our hands. When it comes to the supply chain, specifically upwards, we're depending a lot on our suppliers. And this, by the way, is also the majority of our Scope 3 emissions. So we have to work with them. We have to collaborate. We have to convince them to walk our pathway. And that's, by the way, exactly what we're doing in the transition plan. So we're looking into where are the big levers, where is the big amount to be saved. We have set ourselves interim goals, like 2030, we want to achieve 55% real reduction. I'm not talking about offsetting here. And that's what we specifically have to do with these supply chain partners. And we started with the very top, the big names, the big emission contributors, and we'll walk ourselves down towards really the long tail of those suppliers. And we have dedicated measures defined in terms of very individual talks to sending out standard letters. It's part of the procurement process, so of the tendering, of the evaluation of the performance of a supplier. We cooperate with the CDP, which is the Carbon Disclosure Program, in terms of creating the transparency, because that is the very first initial step for most of our suppliers to understand where they are, and then to think of what are reduction measures and how can we implement it and how can we report against this. The reporting is always the end, the little bit boring part of it, but I'm a very strong believer, also with my background, you can't manage what you don't measure. So you have to have the data ready. And that's how we build the transition plan. So we're very concrete on what happens this year and next year. It's a bit more vague for the future years. We know where we should be in terms of the data. And we will update it in a rolling way.
That's the way we do it. It's pretty astonishing that you do say already in the 80s you did have that first measurement in this field. Do you think that's a little bit linked to the history that this company was a state-owned business, or is it more a cultural thing, or is it the nature of the beast, if you want, given that this technology is so critical? You're at the end of the day, like our veins in our bodies, you're a utility, you're a network. Without you, there is no life functioning in this country. So where did that come from, this early move into this commitment?
Probably it's a mixture of all the things which you've just mentioned. Definitely being state-owned formally, and you might know that we still have a government stake in our shareholder parts, which creates a certain requirement to be also aligned with the general political views and drivers that Germany wants to push forward. And we know that the environmental side in Germany started growing on the political side already in the 80s. So it's not a very new thing, it's a very old thing. The themes within have changed and the urgency has changed, but it's not that it's a new thing for Germany. And we're a Germany-based company, our headquarters based in Germany. And I think there is a good connection to the culture that people in Germany like to think of what does it cause for our society, for our environment. It's not that we're doing all the things great. We know we're a big polluter compared to the number of inhabitants and the size of our country. So a lot of room and need for solutions still on the plate. But that also helped to start that movement. And when I talked to my predecessor, and she was following that pathway at that point in time, we also had great people. So I think in that role in the past, we always had very inspiring and innovative people who had the talent to drive change into the organization and to be at the forefront of developments. And that helped to start very early, probably earlier than a lot of other corporations. And from there, then to take it really step by step.
Cool. And if you go back to this 2040 goal, you told us how you leverage it now.
Yeah.
What will be interesting is how did you get to this goal? There are sometimes companies go in a co-creation mode. Sometimes they use experts from the outside that say, look, that's going to happen in the industry. That's something all states have to do. With the Green Deal, the EU actually threw the stone even further. And so what was the process that led to this? I read it out. Our long-term goal, climate neutrality, net zero by 2040. Our route, the transition plan. That's a super simple statement and output, sorry. But how did you get there in terms of engaging, aligning? Tell us a little bit about it so that we get a grip on it.
Yeah, it was a process. It was a process, and it was not a quick one. Yeah, so we were coming from a pure, pretty limited reduction target, and already did the first steps with our first science-based targets into lowering emissions and thinking of climate neutrality one day. But it wasn't this one day, it wasn't very concrete when I started that role before, where I was heading the green part. And as I'm a big fan of strategy, I asked the team to sit down with me and take a look at where are we today? Where are all the others? So what are our competitors doing? What are other stakeholders expecting from us? Customers, the government, which is an important stakeholder, investors. What are the trends that we're seeing? So how is this topic around climate change developing? And we took all the information together and formed a group within Deutsche Telekom with members of the different countries, colleagues who are working in a comparable sphere, but also the people from technology, from finance, from other areas, and sat down and had numerous workshops to narrow down what is the ambition, what could be a future vision, and how could we get there. And after, I think it took us at least a year of intensive discussions, we went to the board with different suggestions, and one were a little further delayed, like 2045. We had 2040 on the table. We also, by the way, had 2035 on the table, because as a corporate responsibility person, I have to set these ambitions and challenges and have to say, hey, we could probably even do it earlier, but it's a certain risk, because we know turning around our ecosystem around us will take time and still needs a lot of technology developments. So we went in with a recommendation 2040 is a good year for now, for everything we know now. And also at the board, it took us 2-3 attempts. They had more questions on details, on data, on how we forecasted emission development. What of that can we influence? What are typical measures? It's not that we had the super perfect business case, but we had a lot of data and estimates already. And finally, we got it approved, because this is how it works at DT. We want a clear sign-off of the board, because in the end, the board has to support everything that then follows as part of the implementation. So it should be aligned very up high, the hierarchy of a corporation. And for us, that's the DT board. So yeah, it was a process.
So regarding the process you just illustrated, so from a retrospective, what were the biggest challenges in this process?
I think it's the forecasting. What corporations are typically not used to is doing long-term forecasts. We're all used to planning 3 or 4 years, and even year 4 is already a bit vague, and there are certain ambiguities in the data points. And I came, and that was, by the way, we started end of 2018 on that discussion. And I came with 2040 and 2050. So that's a long time ago. Most of the people working on this will not be working for Deutsche Telekom, because they will already be retired. So to get people to think such a long time ahead of them, and also get data in, knowing that the data most likely will not be accurate, because you need to guess a lot and you need to think of different scenarios. What is the best case, a middle, a worst case scenario? That was not easy because you need to convince people of a different thinking model, but also you need to get data at all to start that scenario thinking. And that was a challenge. And I think this still is a challenge when it comes to these type of models, because data on ESG is not so super transparent around the world.
So regarding to that long-term planning, which is really interesting because, as you said, usually short-term planning is always there. Often we observe that there's an EBITDA planning until the end of the year and no really long-term strategy goals. And this goal to save the world is essentially a really long-term goal. So what were the benefits while working with those people, working in a frame of a really long-term strategy?
I think the one thing is that what people, I think, personally take out of that is, how do I maneuver through this level of uncertainty that you have? The further you go down the years, the less you know on what's going to happen and the less influence you have on this today. So that's the first thing, because I think we're living in a very ambiguous and a very volatile, uncertain world today, and probably this is even more increasing. So people should learn how to maneuver through this. The second thing was also that when you get different stakeholders, different people around the table, not everyone buys into the topics. There are critical voices, and that is important. You have to hear the critiques as well, because specifically, and that's what I learned around different functions, you're always sitting in your own echo chamber. Yeah, you're talking to people who are like you, who have the same mindset, who have the same knowledge, the same background, and it's very easy to think I know it all, but we don't. That's the truth. Yeah, even now we have set that goal. No one knows whether it's finally really a great goal. We'll find out 2040 whether this is true, or probably even earlier. So it's good to have people with different views. And that was also very beneficial to understand what drives different functions. What are the pros for something, and what are the risks or the issues or the challenges, and then think of potential solutions in order to come to an agreement. And that was a long process, but a good process, because in the end, I think it created a much better understanding for then going into implementation with all of these peers.
I really enjoy that you're so frank and direct, and I think that's good for everybody to hear. It's hard to do it. It hasn't been done before, and particularly the measurements, as you said. Sometimes we have examples where they're not all methodologies there, neither technically nor from a regulatory standpoint of view. And there you go, like, okay, let's try. And so to me, ESG is not only an afterthought, it's really actually most impact is created in the design of products and services, etc. So it's a way of doing things on one hand, and on the other hand, it's like an innovation program, right? You try, you learn, you iterate, you go back. So maybe the question, that's why I gave this little intro. It's one thing to commit 2040, and many had to commit. It's really hard. It's another thing to do it, and hard to do it. We are now living in times, and you mentioned it already, where we have so many uncertainties. And again, the short-term planning requires to revisit, to cut cost, to improvise also, thinking about resilient supply chains and what have you, chip wars, what have you. How do you see this longer term commitment? And I still remember one person I had to do business with decades ago, and he always said, Alex, don't think too much around the long term. In the long term, we're all dead. Well, in this case, it might be literal, literally that. But how do you manage this ambiguity? And you mentioned it already a little bit. You know, you commit, but it's so far out. We have now short-term pressures. How do you try to balance that, particularly with your passion and your broad knowledge on how to really do it on the what side, but maybe also on the how side with your personal influencing skills?
I like your question and your point that it's about the how, because this is exactly how I see it as well. I think the sustainability itself, or ESG, or corporate responsibility, however you name it, it is basically about how we do things and how we think differently. It's a mindset question first, and then the rest follows, and probably even automatically follows, because it's a question on how you think about these things. And that's also what we try to implement here at DT. And I can't say that we're perfectly done with that, but there was one thing that helped us to put it into the right place, and that was when we started to implement also the acting responsibly, which is our claim, into the group strategy. And by the way, we didn't implement it on the what lever, we implemented it on the how lever, exactly for that reason. And I think what you need to do on the how side is you need to tell people why it's beneficial for them. That's one of the key questions that we always get asked, by the way. Does sustainability pay off? Does social engagement pay off? And so on. And it's often very difficult to have a very crystal clear business case, though I would love to see much more academic research on this. I think if all the great and knowledgeable people in academia go into this, we will find much more and better answers that make it more tangible, specifically for corporations who primarily are oriented towards economic KPIs, which is one of their key things to create profit. But that would be helpful, and you have to answer that question inside as well. So what I'm trying then to do is share what is in it for you, what is in it for our stakeholders, for example, for our customers, what is in it for you, what's in it for the employees. We know that there are a lot of benefits that either motivate people, that create a level of trust and confidence with us as a partner, that help to create a different mindset that spills over, by the way, into other projects. Yeah, because if you allow yourself to be solution oriented, to be creative, to solve big challenges, you can transfer that learning also into other innovation processes, into other projects. So there is a lot of benefit in there, beside the fact that many ESG oriented activities go into reducing the use of resources, and reducing the use of resources very, very often has a positive cost effect. Yeah, probably not directly, probably midterm or longer term, depends on the business case. So it's really worth investing. So when people come to me and say this is a cost, I tend to say, and there I'm citing a colleague, a peer, which I appreciate a lot, and she said, it's not cost, it's investment, because it has a payback. Yeah, costs are just gone. Yeah, it's an investment. Yeah, may not satisfy all the business rules, but in terms of expectations on payback periods, but it is a real investment, and that's how we have to treat it. What helped us as well is then to break it down into interim steps. I think if you look at 2040, that's a long time. So what are we going to do this year? What do we want to achieve 25? What do we want to do 2030? So we agreed on these sort of 5-year milestones so that we can measure our progress against these milestones. And that is important, because otherwise 15 years, 20 years programs, it's difficult to know where to start and where you are if you don't set yourself interim targets. Yeah, you need to have that in terms of developing a transition plan, for example.
So talking about motivation and awareness, maybe breaking up silos. So what were the most important wins for you during this journey?
I think it's about talking to people, and there it's just a pity that a day has 24 hours and you still also want to have some private time and sleep and eat. I would love to have longer days because I like being with people.
That's an innovation.
Maybe. Probably someone finds out how to do it and still be on a healthy way. But it's spending that time with people. So investing time before you decide on something, and even if that phase takes longer, and I know it can be very enduring and can be very challenging if it takes you weeks and weeks to come to an agreement, but I think it's worth spending that time. One thing that also helped us structurally is we have started to enforce the decentralized parts of the organization. So we do have a network of corporate responsibility managers worldwide. We are operating financially anyway in business segments, so we also have segment leads for corporate responsibility. And we do have people who own since 2 years now, the data controlling, the data governance on those topics. So roles which are not with us any longer, but they are with the controlling functions. They are with accounting. So we reach out into other departments to decentralize the mandate and also the responsibility to turn things into operation, into these directions, into these functions. Because as a headquarter, your arm has a certain length and then you're done. And also you cannot just inflate the team by having more and more and more people. I'm not a big fan of these super big headquarter teams. I think it needs to go where the work is finally done or should be done. And this is what we started a few years ago, and we've re-implemented our group policy 2 years ago, and have been much more vocal and clearer about the roles and the accountabilities and how things should be done. And this is what we're rolling out at the moment. Yeah. Also there, processed. We're not everywhere perfectly set up, but it's a path that we follow as one of the numerous little projects that we're driving.
In one of your posts on LinkedIn, you were writing, it's not just about mastering ESG requirements in a day-to-day business, but also about developing personal and interdisciplinary skills. And you mentioned then later conflict resolution, communication, negotiation, and persuasion skills. And you said that it's really important for you and your philosophy to really make it not only a mindset, but also a way of doing business.
Yeah.
And you said that you have implanted on a geographic lens, but also a segment lens, those amplification points, those nodes, if you want. But tell us a little bit more about this development plan that you were hinting, and this mindset of it's more than just a task or more than just a function. Maybe you can allude to that, because you seem to be really passionate about, stepping up here.
Yeah, I think the thing that we looked at is the one thing is, what type of organization structures do you need? So what helps you? And that should, by the way, be closer to how generally your corporation or your business is set up. Yeah, if you have certain rules, structures, use them, leverage them. Don't reinvent something completely else. Because in the end, ESG, if you really want this to be successful, it needs to fit really very well into that existing system. Yeah, otherwise it's always a foreign thing, a different thing, an add-on thing. And I think this is one of the key problems, that people still think that they're doing business and then they are probably doing E or S or G or parts of that. It should be an integral, incremental part of everything you do. So for that, you need to go into the organization. That's one thing that can help you to drive the integration or the decentralization, or to bring it into the DNA finally. The second thing is the people. We're still working with people, even though AI will help us with a lot of processes, also hopefully in the ESG sphere. But at the moment, it's still people. So you need to engage with the people. You need structures to see them. We, for example, have a regular meeting where we really see the people face to face. This was so tough in Corona times when we only could do it online. And I felt that going back to really seeing them once a year, despite the fact that, yes, some of them have to fly, or travel with a car, it's absolutely worth, because these 1 or 2 days that you spend together is a huge hub of sharing knowledge, bonding, inspiring, creating motivation, setting joint plans, and then going back into your country where you're normally located. We're also doing calls with them, training sessions, and so on. And at the moment, and this is where the skill topic comes in that I wrote about some weeks ago, we looked into how do we enrich the knowledge of others, even outside that special network, because these people, they have already the same mindset that we have, at least more or less. What do we do with all the others who are not yet with us on that journey? And we found out that the one thing is certain capabilities, technical capabilities. How do I do an analysis? What is the topic about? Why is it important for my role? The other thing are skills which have more to do with your personal capabilities, with your personal way of thinking and reacting. And ESG is a complex thing, so they need to be able to maneuver through this level of uncertainty, ambiguity, how to maneuver through a situation where you don't have all the data at hand and you still need to get the data. Also maneuvering through that mindset side even when you're personally convinced, your peer who you're talking to, your colleague, which you need for a certain task, may not be convinced. So how do you go into a type of negotiation? How do you stand the fact that you will have drawbacks? You will have situations where you have blocking points and you don't get along at the moment. Yeah, you have to develop a certain level of resilience. And these are all the personal type of skills that we have to think about. It's not just the technology or the technical knowledge around ESG. It's a lot about developing your personality to be ready for that. So we have to do both things. And we now started to think of how can we bring this into a better learning experience for the people. We're going to release our training academy, who looks in the first place a lot still at the technical part of the knowledge, because this is what we had ready. But we also look into how do we integrate the other personal development things that people should go through and how to combine it with HR. We're doing this, by the way, and this is also one example for collaboration. We're doing this together with our HR function because they own skilling and knowledge management in the group. And this is exactly where it should be. Yeah, I'm not the better expert to define what is the right platform, the right approach, the right concept. We exactly need them to really bring this into life. So we're harvesting from everything they have as learning offerings already. And discussing with them how can we integrate it better there.
We just had a discussion with, I think we can talk about it here. It's not a corporate secret. So when we talked to Siemens, they were just doing something similar, a really broad, wide circularity training to enable people and to do both what you just said.
Yeah.
And we got the notion that it was a real big success. And I think these new disciplines that keep coming in horizontally, AI is another example.
Yeah.
Platform and ecosystems are an example. Robotics will be an example, etc. It's really important that you take people along. And you talked a little bit about the bubble, where we are in the marketplace platform ecosystem bubble, if you want. And so to take those along is really, really important. You are a co-founder with other big corporations. We named Siemens already, BASF, Bosch, etc., of Catena X. You're part of Cofinity X. And we see more and more corporates also having learning and sharing groups. Do you also have something in your field where you, beyond your personal network, on a more institutionalized exchange, share with other peers, may it be DAX companies or other corporations around the world, given your global profile?
Yes, we do. I mean, Catena X is a great example, and I know that we're also looking into cooperating with others specifically on how to better share ESG data, which is also a use case comparable to Catena X for the automotive side, to think of how can we do that. That's one of the things we're driving as well, with the support of the colleagues who are also doing the platform business already today. And we're cooperating with a number of associations where partly we're founding members because we set them up with others exactly for that purpose, or we want to create some more influence on the market. And just to give you one or two concrete examples is the one thing we're actively involved is the Joint Audit Corporation, or the Corporation Beyond Auditing in the future. So that alliance has now been established as a real non-profit organization, and we're, I think, around 30 members now from the telco sphere, and the purpose is twofold. The one thing is, how do we create more transparency on auditing data when auditing the suppliers on ESG issues, by the way? So we know that we have a lot of commonalities. For us, it's a tough process. For the supplier side, it's a tough process, specifically if you go into tier 2, tier 3, tier 4, even when you have little suppliers and they don't have the capacity to do audits for 30 customers. which are probably customers further away down the supply chain from their point of view. And that's where we combined not only the know-how, but also the whole process, how we drive this to make it very efficient. So we share also the data and the information, all protected by data protection, NDAs, and whatever you need. But that's a very successful thing. And the second element of that cooperation is we share also knowledge, also on how we develop topics jointly further. For example, one thing we look into at the moment is how do we develop better carbon reduction programs in the supply chain? So what is exactly missing for suppliers to be at the forefront, to help us develop things, to innovate themselves? So this is what we're looking at. How do we create the transparency on data? So and there are many other sort of side initiatives out of JAC that we're driving forward. So that's a big example. We're doing another thing in GESI, the Global E-Sustainability Initiative, where it's a bit the broader sphere of ICT, but we're now reaching also out into water management, energy management, so in other sectors as well. And there it's also, again, a lot about how do we define joint standards that help us together? How do we go into detailed cooperation on certain themes? How do we work with NGOs and academia in a much closer alignment on the ESG topics that matter for our ICT industry? And there are many more examples where I think this collaboration and this information sharing is very, very important.
So you have this long-term goal and you developed a new network inside the company. You developed lots of new skills. You are also collaborating with ESG networks, super innovative, based on blockchain. So would you say all this initiative also drives innovation in other parts of the company because you have this new dynamics coming up?
I hope it does. I couldn't prove it, but I think when you're working in that mindset with others, it automatically spills over. So what I do see is, and this is probably a little example, but it's the most tangible one for me, is we have this pioneer group of employees who involve themselves in initiatives. We give them the platform to operate, but they steer themselves. They come up with little projects and ideas. And we help them when they can't get through certain processes or when they have questions or they need management support. But most of the time they're on their own. And they came up with great ideas and great innovations, little ones, process innovations, things to rethink how we do certain things. One of the things, for example, was we're a big employer, so we have canteens everywhere, and you have these coffee cups which were all not really recyclable. They are thrown away after you use it, and you can't, by the way, recycle them because they are not really out of paper. They have this plastic inlay and so on, not very good for the environment. They came up with the idea of why don't we go into a reusable cup? Who are the partners out there? And it's not that we invented that cup. We partnered with someone who does this in Germany and has already a big network. And it took some time to convince the players because this was different. Processes needed to change. When you have reusable cups, you need to take them back. You need to wash them. You need to hand them out again. It's a complete different process to filling it into a cup and then handing the coffee onwards. But in the end, it creates a lot of impact, As a group, we probably had around 700,000, 800,000 cups a year. So you can imagine going into something which is reusable for hundreds, 150 coffees, 200 coffees, 400 coffees. That creates a massive impact. And that group, they talk to each other. And they also went into business things where they could change things. And one thing that I appreciate a lot of that group is they are super motivated, and I'm pretty sure they take that motivation into their regular job because they all have regular jobs outside being a green pioneer. And I'm pretty sure they take that view and the way how they do things into how do I change things in the business. But it's not just ESG, I have to say. Telecom overall is a lively company. We're doing a lot in the AI topic. We're doing a lot on how do we create innovations within the network, things that customers might not always see because it's internal, but it helps to improve customer services, the quality of the network. And I think all of these things come together, and that creates a different atmosphere.
Talking about reusability and circularity, you took over 14 million devices back and refurbed them. So that's super interesting. But for me, a really important part of that is how you do that. So do circularity platforms play a role in that scenario?
In some parts they do. Not to the big majority yet. It's a bit of a different system country by country. So the overall figure is good. It's a good start. When you look into the details, we know that we still have a way to go. Typically what we're doing is we're partnering with someone who is really capable in helping us not only to take it back, but then also to go into either refurbishment or recycling. Because when a device comes back, you never really know whether you can repair it or adjust certain things and whether it still really has a good value, or you find out that it needs to go into a proper solid recycling, along our quality standards. So you need a partner who's capable of doing that. And we have different partners in our marketplaces. Some partners who also use this in connection with a platform, but also partners who do it as a closed process. And this is an area where definitely we're looking into at the moment in terms of what type of platforms are out there, what can help us in terms of the different types of devices. It will also probably not be this one size fits all, because we see that when you talk about mobile devices, smartphones specifically, there is an own market that started to mature already to a certain extent. New traders, new players come into this game, and we're not producing our own phones with a small exception on some parts, but basically we're offering third-party phones from all these big smartphone brands around the world. So platform there is still a question mark for me. It's more, I think, bilateral relationships with either one of these refurbishers or the manufacturer of the phone or a dedicated partner, which, for example, is a successful business case in B2B, because the personal attachment to the phone is not so close. When it comes to the fixed line devices, because we have a number of markets where fixed line is a relevant portion of our business, that's a bit different. There we do see the devices are of a certain type, of a certain size. There we do see more trends developing where a platform where you share with others can make sense. And when you then go into the big stuff, the network, the IT equipment, yes, we do see platforms arising. We're also in discussion with some of them to understand what could work for us with all the boundaries that we have on the financial side, on the operational side, on the legal questions that you have for offering equipment for reuse, for example, specifically because everything is bound with software. And there you have IPR discussions and warranty discussions. But I think this is an area where I see the biggest potential of bigger platforms and ecosystems being established or being there and growing.
You talked about some cultural differences and also what is the current estate out there. We do have a global database of circular platforms, and we see consumer electronics sitting in the sweet spot because you do have a meaningful volume. So there are 2 billion phones out there every year. And on the other hand, you do have a good value. And you have programs like Apple, which is robot supported. We see the progress in humanoid robots. We see, however, also in this database that there are already unicorns, green, we call them the green unicorns, like Back Market in France.
Yeah.
And in our pre-discussion, you were talking a little bit about the consumer differences, right? You were mentioning us here in the Central European, German-speaking markets and their wishes versus the US. I thought that was interesting, how we as consumers are a little bit unrealistic. Could you maybe share that with everybody else? That was a little bit funny almost.
Yeah, and I think that's very natural. I think specifically to smartphones, this is where it all happens. Is that we do have different views on what a smartphone means to us. On one side, it's super important. I think if you would sort of rebuild the Maslow'sche pyramid of human needs, connectivity, and probably even the smartphone itself would pop up there, which is amazing that a technology device gets up on the same level as nutrition or other stuff. And I think that already explains that there is a high emotional attachment to devices, to functionality. It's close to a fashion item in some parts, and that depends again on how you're growing up, in what market, in what geography you're living, what are your financial backgrounds. So it's not the same. Also, the generations have different views on this, but the emotional attachment is high, and that means handing back the device is not easy for people, obviously. They have questions on data security. They think, oh, I still own it. I can keep it. There are photos on there which I want to keep. I don't want to let go. And that means this device has a high value. When it then comes to, if I now sell you the device because I know it can have a second life, it's still functioning, someone else could use it, I put a high price to it. That's what we experienced in a number of times. Again, when I then want to buy a new one or the same one refurbished as a new one, interestingly, now I think of it in a different way. Suddenly it's not emotional to me because I don't own it yet. It's something that is a mass device. Yeah, there are millions out there of that device, so it should come at a decent price. Most of the people know that if there are a lot of devices out there, it should have a lower price than if it's a very individual thing. And this is what creates a discrepancy. Yeah, it can happen that people want to sell it at a certain price and want to buy the same thing at a lower price. And I mean, everyone who's into business and economics knows that this equation doesn't end up with a positive result. Yeah, we need to buy it, and also it's the same for back market and others. You need to buy it at a lower price, because refurbishing comes with cost, the operations, the handling, the platform setup comes with cost, and then you can sell it at a higher price to the customer. Yeah, ideally still on a good level below the price of an original new device. Yeah, so that it is interesting. It's still commercially interesting for people. Yeah, and it needs to be, because otherwise I think this whole refurbishing market will not kick off if it's not also commercially interesting for people.
Talking about commercially interesting, we talked about the role of the brand and the trust that is there, and that ESG is a way of doing business. It's not only a mindset, but it's an investment. Talking about these marketplaces for either B2C devices and or network equipment on the B2B side, do you think and I know you can't reveal it fully, but let's dive into that a little bit. But do you consider it could be something that you guys could be investing in, to do business model innovation and get more people in the organization to the beauty of platform business models, where you can beautifully layer on top other business models like embedded insurance, embedded finance, retail media. You're an omni-channel player with all these stores that you're having. And on the back of it, help shape the perception of the brand of really being a green brand. So is that something where you're, from your expertise horizontal role, you would be even able to invest the M&A agenda, you would be able to invest the innovation agenda, and would you say that's worth a deeper dig? And you hinted it already a little bit that you're investigating marketplaces, but would you go so far that that's part of this innovation and M&A agenda almost?
I don't know yet. I'm a bit, or not only myself, we're a bit sort of undecided yet on that topic. We're looking into this, but there are different things to consider, and we do have a discussion around the question. We're definitely sitting in the middle, though. Yes, we have to think about what is our role in this whole ecosystem, because I do see longevity of devices, refurbished markets, reusability. this is definitely coming, yeah. And if we're not doing it ourselves, the market, at latest, politics and governments will press this into the market because resources will be rare, and that means they will be costly one day. And I don't think we have to go 20 years into the future. And it's the same about the environmental impacts that we will see that despite inflation, everything we will have to care more about in the future. The question is, where do we want to be as a telco, as an operator? And in theory, we're in a good position. Practically, we're also depending in this ecosystem on others. For example, I mentioned most of the devices we're today selling or we're refurbishing, we don't produce them, yeah? There are big brands who are the manufacturers, yeah? We don't do phone business in that sense, yeah? Phone production business, yeah? So we're thinking to ourselves, we're discussing this also with some of the brands out there, what is their role? Because they will need the resources in the end. They will need to produce newer devices, do innovation on devices. So why don't they go stronger into that direction? Shouldn't they be doing it first? Because they anyway have the production information and the knowledge. So they should have also the disassembly information and knowledge and be able to close that loop. And we can act as an intermediate in between and help them to cycle it through the different cycles so that it comes out, it goes back, it comes out, it goes back. That's, for example, one of the roles that makes sense because we can leverage the assets that we have, which is basically creating that turnover, yeah, and operating those processes towards the customer. Yeah, that's one of the things. The other thing you mentioned, innovations, additional business models, yes, but it's again something where we need other partners who are more knowledgeable in these spheres, yeah. It sets up a whole new ecosystem, and I think it will develop, but we're still a little bit indifferent on where exactly should we be. Yeah, should we drive this if the others are not too fast and go into, for us, a very new market, which means investment into a lot of things? Or do we push more for the others who have that knowledge to come together and come up with a joint solution? And there, I can't give you an answer today. And I think for the other operators, most likely they also have the same thoughts, the same views. And we sometimes have these discussions commonly because it's about this whole world of telco. Where do we want to be in the future? But it's not that it's clear for us yet. I think it will take some more time, some more developments to also for ourselves decide what is the best place to be and where can we create the best impact with the assets and the capabilities that we have today.
Talking about that, you talked about the industry, right? So what we see more often is that association. We already talked about Catena, where actually more investors form a consortium. But also associations move forward. So the GSMA, and maybe you explain to the audience what the GSMA is, has put forward together with another partner a marketplace operation. That's one thing that is happening out there. We do see a red competitor of yours having started marketplaces with a different angle, not the circular angle. Yeah. We talked about the consortia. So marketplace business and platform business models and collaboration in ecosystems is a common theme. Maybe you can explain to the audience what GSMA is doing and how you look at these and whether you do then test and learn programs to, tip your toes into the water to really find out and create evidence-based innovation, whether there is some merit in it. That will be interesting because we thought it's a healthy development that associations actually, they are natural aggregators, if you want. They are not businesses normally, but what they do have is the neutrality. They do have the governance. They do have the reputation. They have the access to different forms of funding and all that good stuff. And also, they are close to the governmental side of societies, and so it would be interesting how you look at that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, GSMA is one of the associations we're very actively involved in since the very early time. It's the association that bundles all the mobile operators from coming with different business models. So also the MVNOs are in there, but also the suppliers. The supplier side plays a role in GSMA today. And it's great because then everyone who has a certain say in that industry around telco, around the mobile telecommunication side of things, gets together. And the GSMA is important because, yes, and we're in discussion with them on how they look at the moment, for example, at platforms and exchange for ESG, specifically for circularity. So we're in contact with them. We had some talks also together with some of our peers or competitors, because this is an area where I like the term of co-petition a lot. Already when I was in the procurement roles, because there are areas where you need to cooperate with your competitors, and co-petition exactly describes that. And this is one of the places where we have joint interests on how do we set up a marketplace that follows certain rules and requirements from the environmental side, but also has clear strategies and frameworks for the financial side, for all the legal questions, and where we operate together. Yeah, because
Cool.
in the end, there are a lot of commonalities. I have to say the GSMA topic at the moment, this platform is more looking at the network side of things. A lot of research and activities goes into network sustainability, which also makes sense because we're using so many amounts of technology, really tons and tons of technology every year that you need in order to have that network that is everywhere around the country. Yeah, even if people don't see it, it's really everywhere. And there you have your change cycles, and you need to rethink the model on what do we do with components we don't need anymore, or components that we need only for a certain amount of time, or where we have warranty topics where we need components for repair, and we probably don't need to buy it new because we know we will anyway exchange that release of a component in 2 years. So these are the thinkings that we have at the moment, and where we look together with GSMA at the available platforms and are considering how to move on.
So talking about technology, Deutsche Telekom has a lot of different units building platforms in B2B, B2C, and now circularity comes up in lots of industries. So do you have the feeling that there is a rising awareness, a rising demand also for you as a system CX platform provider coming up?
I think circularity is probably one of the, or probably the new big thing when you look into the environmental themes, the big meta themes. Not that climate change is not important anymore, but it is to a certain extent matured. We know how to measure with some exceptions. We know what to do. It's there. You have to do it. The new thing, I think, is circularity, because it adds a lot to climate change, fighting climate change, but it also goes into this resource and also finally into how to support biodiversity and other elements. So for me, I think this is the next big super trend thing that is coming. And yes, it hits us also because when you look at e-waste, this is one of the biggest growing waste areas. And this is why our industry, telecom, and then also Deutsche Telekom, has to think about this. And we have our own targets on this. And one thing is circularity requires working with others. I mean, it's part of that model to think about platforms, yeah? Because it's about closing that loop. That's different to the climate change topic. And also there you need exchange platforms, common models. But circularity will not work without the collaboration unless you're playing the whole ecosystem and every part in that ecosystem yourself. And that will not work. No one on the world really does that, yeah, unless you're living alone on a farm and never ever talking to anyone else and you do everything yourself. But this is not our today's world, and specifically not for a corporation who has a place in this whole ecosystem. So yes, I think it will definitely come, yeah. Whether it's going to be one big platform, numerous platforms, geographical platforms, probably even platforms to certain type of technology devices or products and services. That's something that we will see in the future. But yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing this, because we need more interesting platforms that help us as well to move this pathway on becoming more circular.
To build on that, I think that's spot on. We say going full circle alone versus going full circle together. And so having, particularly in Europe, not having the deep knowledge on how platform business models work in senior leadership teams, education only now brings this type of thinking forward. the natural way to go is bilateral. Yes, still in the spirit of we need an ecosystem, we need co-opetition. But actually what people rarely look at are the transaction costs of circularity. So we've done a white paper recently with SAP and Bosch Rexroth on EV batteries, circular platforms. And what was interesting there, the transaction cost to really identify, take back, grade, dismantle, etc., etc. There are 14 different steps of different ecosystem partners involved in that. That's what people not look at. They have more procurement angle. Oh, we secure our supply for the future. We get a hand on scarce resources, and through that make our supply chain more resilient and contribute to national security, which is also becoming more a theme. And so circularity actually also plays dividends to that. But I think what we're seeing, a platform is not only helping, it's really driving out costs, because that's what it's really good at, in discovery, matching, and driving out costs. And so from our expert standpoint of view, because that's what we do day and night, we really, and that's why actually this podcast exists, we want to promote the thought of dare to jump into platform business models, support it, do it alone, invest in those, and also maybe form different forms of consortia. And one example that we're currently engaged in is the oil and gas industry. And they're actually forming I wouldn't call it a full consortium, but it's a project collaboration that helps found a platform and support that platform, and then go out and as a remainder, this platform will enable the whole industry to make a giant leap in circularity. So in other words, what would be great, and that would be our big wish, and I'm so glad to have you here because you represent this modern ESG leader. So far we had the circularity and ESG guys, and we had the platform guys, and they didn't know of each other. And what we need to really help say, look, you have to do it together, because everything has to be circular and everything has to be digitally enabled. And the end game is an ecosystem of ecosystems, most likely. And so our wish would be that Deutsche Telekom and peers really look into these type of business models, because they will help create the impact, and that colleagues are not saying, well, you're wasting money here, it's only cost. No, it's investment. And so that's a pitch for that. Sorry for that little tangent. Coming back to B2B and your network equipment and the GSMA, you told us that there is a giant storage test that you did. Maybe you tell us, because we are only users, right? Mobile phones have to work. We don't care, and that's not our job to take care of that. We want a good connection. We want good data loads. And so you have this giant storage test. What are you trying to learn there, and how are things going?
Yeah, what we do is, networks consume a lot of energy. So what is air for us as human beings is really electricity for a network operator, specifically when you have a fixed line network with all these lines going through the ground somewhere, and a mobile network on top. And that means we have to make sure that energy for us is there. And I think when the war broke out in the Ukraine, that was the point in time where we had to revisit our energy strategy and rethink it from a resilience perspective. Yeah, so how do we create a network which is resilient in terms of the energy supply? Because the network is super important. It's really a basic functionality of our country. No digitization, no AI, most of the services wouldn't work without connection. Really, it's the foundation of everything in our modern world today. So we looked into this and said, there are a few ways how you can sort of go into a stronger resilience, yeah? And the one thing is the price side, and we were quite good because we hatched a lot before, so we were not so much touched by the development of the pricing. But still, looking mid and long term, it was also about the supply. And for the network, there are two things that you need. The one thing is you need a certain storage capacity that helps you immediately when you have an energy loss and energy breakdown, you need specifically all the core areas, you need battery storage to ramp up, to keep up the network running. But then you have to go into, if you need this for longer hours, for a day, for more days, you need to go into something which, by the way, is not battery. Yeah, because no battery storage on the world could cover the network load, the energy demand that we have today. There you need to go into generators. And that's another story where you have to think of, is it always diesel or is it HV100 one day? There are also options. But for battery, we looked into this and we had that already since years as part of the resilience strategy. And then the thinking was out there, but we could probably do more. We could probably think of bigger centralized storage hubs where we could not only think so much about the pure redundancy case, but also think of balancing of peaks, because we're going into contracts where we purchase green energy from the market. Why shouldn't we store it and then reuse it more often in the network in phases where this green energy is not available, so that you can have a positive influence on your own emission balance, but also if you don't need it, you can also think of models where you can probably sell it to the network operators, the electricity network operators, because they might need then capacity, because networks always have to be in an equal balance. Yeah. And this is what we looked at. The first case really is for us to now store this. And this is where we now invested into bigger battery storage, and we'll have some more installations around Germany and find out how much of that can we leverage in our network. And the good thing is that beside the contracts that we have out there with other operators, it adds a certain portion of environmental friendly electricity also to the grid. And I think this is one of the good cases where we can also, at least to a small extent, give something back into the grid, and we can also use this to be more independent and in the same case to be more green. Yeah, because it's our own produced and stored energy. But I have to be, it's not so much water into the wine that I want to drop there, but battery will not solve the equation for a network operator. It's always a rare portion, because the energy demand is so high that this will not be solved by battery. But you can shape peaks, you can sort of use it for redundancy cases, and so on.
That's going to be interesting, because these second life batteries, all of a sudden you have the OEMs with the EVs on one hand. On the other hand, you do have the electrical utilities and you folks and others. So all of a sudden, because batteries will be the core of the energy, the great transition, and having so much scarcity of these resources like the lithium and so forth, we need this second life, and then also the recycling. And Bosch just announced huge investments in this field, and BASF has done the same on cathodes. So what we see, the ecosystem that needs batteries and will be able to provide this second life and a meaningful use with different amplitudes, etc., is a giant case again for marketplaces, because they are operated on data. They're super efficient, and they're very effective in also supporting the allocation of those different batteries, because not every battery is suited for each application. And then of course you need the whole ecosystem of reverse logistics, dismantling, etc. So I think we will be in a battery world, and it's so interesting to see you there as well, because if you're not part of a B2B industry, you wouldn't think that. You would only think maybe a mobile phone in your battery. But to stabilize the grid and to help getting greener is really fantastic. So I think we need to wrap up. Maybe some last questions on the outlook to the future, David. Up to you.
So talking about balance, talking about energy consumption. So Microsoft, Google and Meta combined, they are consuming a lot more energy than Switzerland. But on the other hand, we have lots of digitalization and investments in the green area. So do you think digitalization or innovation can balance out this vast energy consumption it has on its own?
A very good question, by the way, well thought through. And yes, this is exactly what we think about as well. And I can give you, at least for now, two answers to this. The one thing that I'm always also telling my own colleagues is that energy consumption itself is not bad per se. Yeah, the question is, how green does it come? That's the one thing. So decoupling CO2 emissions, decoupling resource implications from the energy production. That's one part of the solution to the topic, because the greener it comes, the less problematic the amount of energy is that you need. The second thing is, yes, I think digitization and specifically modern technologies such as AI, they have a huge potential to lower energy demands and energy consumption. And that is a clear task to the whole ICT industry, not only to us as a network operator in different countries or a system provider, to think of how do you use innovations in programming, green coding, the way you size and set up your data centers, the way we set up the network to be as efficient as possible. So energy efficiency is a huge driver, not just for the cost side of things, also for the resource implication that it has. And then to offer solutions and use digitization, AI, and everything which is out there in order to offer others, customers, to become greener every day, to use less than they used before. Yeah, and not just, by the way, on energy, also on all the other resources that are sometimes required if you want to perform an operational process, if you want to produce a product, and so on. Yeah, think of all that waste that could be avoided if you were using digital twins, for example. It's one of the key use cases that if you have great scenarios, you don't need to produce that waste. Think of intelligent tracking systems that track logistics and packaging to make sure that things are reused and also are not going into waste. Think of also all the AI that helps you to design the way you set up and steer your production in order to lower the consumption everywhere. And there are a lot of use cases. I'm a big fan that I believe digitization can be the key enabler. I think it will not go without. Yeah, we're, by the way, measuring this. We have an own factor where we measure on the CO2 side. Are we enabling our own customers based on real cases at DT? So with real customer figures, real data. It's not artificial cases. It's not the complete portfolio that we have. It's selected subtopics. But that's what we're doing. And we're also looking there into standardizing this, because I think we also need better metrics there around the world in order how to compare, not just for ourselves. I would love to be great at that, but also to understand where are the others, because I think their competition is always very helpful. Yeah, and it creates and inspires to be even better on that side. Yeah, I think this is a key thing.
Awesome. So this looks like a great outlook. So for me, maybe my last question, what would you define as personal success or business success for the future? So what are your big, hairy, audacious goals and projects you want to push forward?
I think I have 2-3 things that I'm following. The one coming from the content side of things, I hope that together with also our peers in the ecosystem, our partners and customers, we find a much better approach to circularity, specifically on the devices. I'm not so much worried for the network side. We'll find a way. Yeah, but on the devices where we're so much depending on customers bringing it back, I hope that we jointly find the clue how to get into more circularity, because it's really a tough thing and we want to go there, but we need others and we need more mindset change around us to really get that going. That's one of the things that I hope for. And if we sort of find that trick, if we solve that thing, that's going to be a huge success for myself, but also I think for the company and our society. Second thing, and this is something that I'm working on, I hope that, I'm having this role of corporate responsibility, some call it CSO, however you name it. Ideally, we don't need that type of role anymore. That's my personal view. if I'm not needed anymore in that role, or a person like myself is not needed anymore because it's embedded in design, in controlling, in finance, in production, in logistics, wherever. And it's more a strategy task to think this through together with all the other strategy elements. I think then we're in a really good shape. And that's, by the way, how I started. My predecessor, she was really afraid when I said one of the things that I'm going to work on is making myself redundant. You don't need me anymore one day, or you need it in a very different way. We're not yet there, unfortunately. That's the real side of things. But that's what I would love to be working on.
Also,
This is a
that.
beautiful thought. I like that. It's like the chief transformation officer, or that this is not needed because it's a new way of doing business, and basta, as the Italians say.
And basta.
Well, Melanie, basta. It's lunchtime when we record this. It's time for pasta, and therefore basta. Thank you very much. This was really outstanding, super interesting, very personal, very open, and so thank you very much for sharing that. Also, thank you very much for your team that has helped in the background prepare that. And we wish you all the best on this journey. And if you don't have a job anymore, I'm sure you will find something with your curiosity and the broad skills. So all the best for you.
Thank you very much. I can return the pleasures back to the two of you.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks. People, please come back and do share, comment, like, and subscribe to our video podcast series. And we hope to see you soon when we say
Platform Disco!